Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. I'm Chris Rud, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. Today I'm joined by another amateur. Like I said in the last time I had an amateur on, I want to try to get at least one amateur every, 3 to 4 episodes, because I think that amateurs' perspectives are going to be really interesting to a lot of the listeners. Today I'm joined by John Robertson.
Yes, sir.
He's my neighbor, sort of. Located I'm located in Illinois, and he's in Indiana, and we've ran into each other a few times at, I think, mostly just SRSs. Have we ever ran into each other?
Yeah, I think just SRSs.
Just SRSs.
Yeah.
So I'll brag on you for a little bit.
Oh, gosh.
I think there's a lot of dogs out there that have, a Grand Hunting Retriever Champion title, Master Hunter title, and, maybe a qualified all-age title. But you are pretty unique in that you have a female that is both, has a Grand title, has a Master Hunter title, has a qualified all-age QA2. So you've gotten a first and a second, or any combination of a first and a second twice at a qualifier. And you've also have enough points and won at least one SRS.
Right.
So you have all the titles.
All the titles.
All the titles. I mean, I guess technically you don't have an AFC or an FC, but
I was going to say all of the reasonable titles. Yeah. I mean, the FC, AFC, that's a long shot.
Yeah. Are you running any of those?
Yeah. So actually, Kate's QA2, we spent last spring running qualifiers. She placed in a couple, finished the majority of them that she ran, but the QA2 was earned through all-age trials.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we ran, it would have been last November, our first all-age trial. I signed up for the Open and the Amateur. She jammed in the Open and placed 4th in the Amateur.
Wow.
So went from just dabbling in the Qs to, QA2 over the weekend.
Wow, that's cool. So I didn't realize that. So if you place in an all-age, in either of the all-ages, or does it have to be an amateur, or how does it all work?
Gosh, you put me on the spot.
Okay, don't worry about it.
I think an Open, if you jam an Open, that counts.
Oh, okay.
If you place in an amateur, that counts. So 1 and 2.
Then you get, because that's a real title. So like Winter has a second in a qualifier, which is in a breeding sense or whatever, we say that's qualified all-age. But really, an actual AKC title only comes when you have. There's a lot of combinations, and I know you kind of explained one, which is a very rare way to do it.
Yeah, not the normal way to do it.
That's way cooler than somebody that gets first and second in a queue. Or the normal way is you get a first and a second, or 2 seconds, or whatever. You just have 2 combinations of first or second in a qualifier gets you a QA2, which is actually a title in the AKC. So for those of you that don't know about titles, a QA2 is pretty significant and pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it more or less is an indication that you've got a dog that's ready to advance from the qualifier to the all-age level. Like you said, there's several different ways to do it, and there's quite a few nuances, because I think even, like, if, say you place twice in 2 qualifiers, if you're signed up for a third one, weekend, you can still participate in it.
Yeah.
I've ran into that a couple times, not myself, but other people.
The gentleman that won the trial that Winter got second in, he had, I think, and if you don't ever win one, you can stay in indefinitely. So he had 4 seconds, and then he finally won the trial.
Okay, see, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but anyway, that's just interesting. Like, there's a whole bunch of nuances to that. And, this being the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast, we don't talk a lot about field trials. We will, if it benefits somebody understanding the hunt test game.
Sure.
But I do think that it's impressive, right? I mean, congratulations. It's really, really, really cool. And another thing is what I think is cool is that we both have dogs from very similar lines. Winter was bred by Jeremy Legg as your dog was,
Kate, yes.
as Kate was. Different parents, but very close. So the sires are the same.
Sires are different.
Well, Nola is from Hank, and
Nola's from Hank, yeah.
and so is Piper. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Of
So
the females.
I told Jeremy because he was just sitting here making some. I don't even know what that was, but he's making something healthy.
He just wanted the plug.
He wanted the plug. So if you're looking for a nice puppy, Hickory Hills has another puppy or another breeding out of the dog.
Yeah, so Kate's mom, I think Jeremy recently bred her to another dog that he trains named Toby. I could have that wrong. You'd have to check with Jeremy.
Well, reach out to Jeremy if you're looking for a really, really well-bred pup. Winter is out of Jeremy's kennel and really solid. It's pretty cool. This SRS, we have Winter's running, Flea, who's Winter's littermate, and Joby has Millie running. So we got in this SRS, we have 3 litter mates, so I think that's pretty cool.
I'll add to that, because the reason I got Kate, I was kicking around the idea of getting a new puppy. A buddy of mine actually reached out who was interested in buying a dog, wanted one primarily for hunting, but wanted a nice pedigree, and asked me if I'd do some looking around for him. So I started poking around, and I ran into Jeremy's Scratch and Piper litter. So I referred him to Jeremy. He ended up buying a male from Winter's litter. Yeah. He primarily hunts with him, like I said. But, and I don't remember the exact timeline, but for at least the next month, on several different occasions, I was like, gosh, that's going to be a really nice breeding. And if I'm going to start another one, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I called him, asked him if he had any more available from that litter, and he didn't. But he told me that he was planning on breeding Nola to Elaine Mitchell's Mason.
Yeah.
I knew about Mason.
I didn't realize you say that. I did know that. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so she's out of Mason. I was familiar with Mason. I had seen Nola a couple times at hunt tests. Thought that it could definitely be a decent pair. Ended up working out for me.
Great. I the first dog that I put a CH title on was a Mason dog.
Yeah, there's a lot of nice ones out there.
Like Mason has produced some really nice dogs. Like I went from a very different type of dog to her. It was my friend's dog, and she's out of. The mom was a dude female. Okay. And so it was dude dude as a grandfather, and then Mason. So she was like so talented, but she's the dog that like I learned how to really train with, and like she has like one of those dogs that they say that has a built-in GPS. Like doesn't matter like how lost you kind of get there on the way, like you kind of like figure it out. You know?
Yeah, I was gonna say those are the dogs that make you look better than you are as a trainer. Yeah. At least me.
Well, cool. So let's talk a little bit, people don't, maybe people don't know who you are. So let's back up and tell me a little bit about how you got into dogs, why you love it. And I'll let you take it from here.
So I started dabbling in the retriever training about 10 years ago. My oldest dog, Luke, is 9 going on 10, which is impossible to believe, but I bought Luke back in grad school with the intention of waterfowl and upland hunting with him. Prior to that, growing up, I was much more involved with sports than I was hunting. That really continued through college.
What sports do you play?
I played everything growing up, but I excelled in baseball. I played at Indiana University, but I did grow up around hunting. So I mean, you know how it is in the Midwest. Deer, turkey, a little bit of waterfowl, upland. We did a little bit of everything. I grew up around bird dogs as well. My dad raised English setters, which we upland hunted with quite a bit. So my intention with Luke, like I said, was to hunt with. I knew that you had to train a dog to hunt. You couldn't just take him and expect him what to do. And that was my plan with him. I was going to teach basic commands. I was going to teach him how to retrieve. Hunt tests, field trials, SRS. I had no idea what any of that was, and certainly had no intention of competing with him. But it was just one of those situations where I picked him up, started doing a little research on how to teach basic commands, and it just kind of snowballed from there. It seemed like every command I taught, I discovered something new that I could teach.
Yeah.
And eventually I began to appreciate the process and challenge of teaching him new things. Next thing you know, we're working on casting in remote whistle sits in the backyard. Somewhere in that first year, I can't remember when, I did discover what a hunt test was. I think he was probably 10 or 11 months old when we ran our first started test. We were hooked after that and have been ever since. I mean, I remember that test going to watch some of the finished dogs, thinking, how the heck do you get a dog to do those things? I don't know how, but I'm going to figure it out. And so that's what we set out to do. Shortly after that, I bought my second dog, Ellie, and I cut my teeth in the hunt test training with those two dogs. Through a lot of trial and error, they were able to attain finished and master hunter titles. I'm a lot more willing to admit now that had far more to do with their natural abilities than it did anything I taught them, which I'm sure we'll get into the mistakes I made early on at some point. But I have no doubt they were both capable of being grand level dogs. I just didn't have the skill set at the time as a trainer to get them there. And eventually it got to the point where I had to make a decision. I could either continue campaigning them in finished and master tests, we could try to run the grand, or they could become my hunting dogs. I could start a new one with the intention of competing. Yeah. And that's ultimately the route I decided to take. That's when Kate entered the picture.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a story that you hear a lot of with amateurs who have had success in, the SRS or the grand or whatever, is that it was their second or third dog
where they finally started to figure things out.
They started to figure it out. And so I think it's important to mention that, because if you're just getting started and, things aren't going great, that's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's like, let this dog teach you how to do it. Like every single pro you talk to, every single amateur that's had success, I don't know if I've ever actually talked to somebody that their first dog that they trained themselves, wasn't trained by another pro, that they did the training on, had a ton immeasurable success.
It's really hard to do. I mean, it's maybe a little bit easier now because there's so much content out there. You've got the programs to follow. They're so accessible.
I mean, really in the last 5 years have I seen those, content really start to get to the point where okay, it's out there if you can find it.
Yeah. It seems like the retriever world has caught up with utilizing social media, internet, like you said, here in the last 5 years, because I think back to when I started 10 years ago, I mean, there wasn't nearly the amount of information. The bigger programs were out there. Lardy, Hillman, Rex Carr, Evan Graham. When I started, I wasn't aware of any of those. Like I said, I was in grad school. I wouldn't have been able to afford them anyway. So a lot of my initial research was just searching internet forums. Mm-hmm. I mean, I watched one of the podcasts you did with Dan. You mentioned his
puppy program.
Yeah. I followed those videos. Freddie King's Meat Dog series was available on YouTube for free at that time. So that's what I worked off of for at least the first two. But I'm getting off on a tangent there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so just be encouraged. Take the opportunity to learn how to learn to train dogs. I don't know if I said that right, but I think it kind of made sense. Anyhow, well, let's jump into. Anyways, is there more that you want to do to kind of share about your getting started?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it.
Well, what was some of the things that you look back on now and you're like, man, I didn't really understand that concept? Or, you get what I'm saying? I'm setting you up.
Yeah. So I, first and foremost, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, when I first started, I didn't understand what it meant to thoroughly finish a step in training, whether that's in your basics training, whether that's through early transition training. I had every intention to, and I think this is one of the mistakes amateurs make early on, is they might have the intention or think that they're doing something thoroughly, but in hindsight, you look back at your first, sometimes your second dog, and you're like, yikes. Yeah, I probably should have spent a little bit more time doing the double T. Yeah. Because you don't do those things thoroughly, it leads to issues down the road. So more than anything, when I think back to mistakes I made with Luke and Ellie, or in hindsight, things I would do differently, it would have just been each step, whatever I thought I was done with it, spend another week doing it, spend another couple weeks doing it, making sure that they completely understand what it is that you're asking them. Because this is another thing in hindsight, and I think probably a mistake a lot of amateurs make, is when you rush through things or you don't do them as thoroughly as they should have been done, you get to the advanced level stuff and you don't realize that the dog simply just doesn't understand what you're asking it to do because you didn't teach it thoroughly to begin with.
Yeah. And typically you didn't teach it because you missed a step that you didn't realize you missed.
Exactly.
Because I think there's two schools of thought. There's the amateur that tries to get through as fast as they can because they want to get to handling,
right,
which I was totally guilty of my first dog.
Yeah.
Like that's the way I was. But then once I experienced how a bad foundation is incredibly hard to move past a certain point, I was like, well, with my next dog, I'm going to be crazy about it. And it was almost I didn't overdo it because I had the right dog, but if I didn't have a dog that wanted to do it as bad as it would, I probably would have been on the wrong side of the momentum.
Right.
But it's because I learned that. And I think my point is there's one side where they want to move really fast, and then the other side that wants to do it right. But just doesn't have the information to see where those little tiny things are, that if the dog doesn't get that small part, it leads to problems down the road. That I think we were talking before we started, it could be 2 years down the road that you finally realize, oh, I get why that was important.
Exactly.
And we were talking about force to pile. Mm-hmm. And I think we should jump into that a little bit. And I'll kick us off, and then you add in anything. But I think the thing that people don't get about force to pile is that they think that force fetch is more important than force to pile. Mm. And it's harder. It's talked about more. It's can be very challenging for your first time, knowing the timing and how to do all that. But really, that is just the first step to what the most important step is, in my mind, for a hunt test dog, which is understanding being forced to a pile and how important that tool is so that you can get to the next step. And what I think happens a lot of times is people say that, but they don't unpack the next couple steps, and then you can see why that's important.
Yeah.
And I think you were talking about your dog. You didn't realize it for 2 years. What was it that kind of...
It was probably a little bit longer than that. But going back to force fetch versus force to pile, I remember my understanding when I first started of force to pile was that it was used as a mechanism for compulsion. So if you had a dog that didn't want to go pick up the bumper, now you've got a mechanism to force them to get there. And my first dog, Luke, had more than enough drive for me and probably my next 5 dogs. So at the time, I'm thinking to myself, I don't need to force him.
He's already doing it.
He's already doing it. He wants to go get it. And I can't imagine a scenario where he's never going to want to go get that bumper. And so that was a step that I probably spent a couple days doing and then never really did anything further with it. At the time, I didn't realize that force fetch and then force to pile is your foundation for indirect pressure, which is then used for very advanced techniques down the road once you get there. And it wasn't until we had chopped through everything else in the advanced training that it dawned on me that's what was missing.
What force to pile does, force fetch teaches them how to have how to remove pressure that is automatically applied. Then the bumper is exposed. They see that bumper. They know if that bumper's in my mouth, I don't receive any pressure. And we're not talking about a lot of pressure. We're just talking about a little bit of pressure here. They get the bumper. The pressure goes away. That's what that step is about. It's about learning how to do that fundamental step plus holding nice. Right? Those are the two things that force fetch really does. What force to pile does, and if you do ladder fetch or you do those walking fetch, I'm just talking about the two big chunks here. There's little steps you can do in between that I do. Some people don't do it, and it's not really important for the conversation here. But what force to pile does is it gives you the tool, like you said, the indirect pressure or the direct, like whatever, however because there's different ways to apply the pressure.
Yeah, sure.
But the point is that you do this step to provide the tool so that when you get into either a drill scenario or a field scenario where the dog I wouldn't say doesn't understand, because I don't think that forcing a dog to do something that they don't understand is going to play out great.
Yeah, yeah.
But when there's something that they know they should do in the field, but they choose not to do it.
Right.
And the example that I think is easy to talk about is, let's say you have a long point or an island that's out in the water, and you're running a blind, and your dog gets to that point. There's a white pole, deep of that island, and you're trying to get the dog to that. They know where that is, but they don't want to get back in the water.
Yeah.
They're like, maybe I can go right. Maybe I think that there's a bird on this point. Maybe you threw a mark on that point earlier and they're sent there. Well, what force to pile does is it builds the tool so that if you use that tool that you built in to force them to go back to that back pile, you can apply that same tool to get them to drive back and to get that bumper.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. You're teaching them how to understand, how to perceive pressure for advanced
work.
Yep.
And I wanted to clarify that because when we talked earlier, I was like, that is the exact same thing that I struggled with.
Yeah.
Is that I didn't understand that the moment that and let's talk about that. So the moment that a dog really understands force is when you've done it so much, your dog. The only way for you to really probably get to the point where they have a really high drive dog is that you might have to be out there for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Waiting for that dog to say, I'm bored.
You're right. It would have been longer than 30 minutes for me. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I kid, but you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you wait, and that was something that it took me a long time to get. Like, I have to wait, and I have to look for the signs. And that's where the art and science come into the dog training side, is I had to wait until I saw that dog did not want to do it anymore. And then I was training.
Yeah.
That was the moment that I was teaching him something. And some dogs, like I've been training this young dog, Tiller. I threw 4 bumpers out there, and like there's certain things you can do that we're not going to get into the nitty gritty. Like you can load the pile, like keep loading the pile, throw one in route to keep their excitement up, because the first couple of days you're not trying to make them do it yet.
Right.
You're just trying to get them to understand what you want them to do. So you're doing it, as all reward based, right? Well, once you decide, okay, today's the day. Today's the day he's going to learn how to do this right. You get him going, and I'll never forget with him, it was, and I texted Tyler Brenner after this. I was like, okay, all the toothpaste came out of the tube, like different ends at one time. It was because a lot of times they show you different things when they're doing it. Like they won't go, or they'll get to the pile and they'll kind of like look around and be like, do I really want to get this? Or they'll do these things. But with him, it was like, okay, today's the day. And as soon as he didn't want to do it, he was running behind me. He was not picking it up. He was running off to the other side. And it was like all within like 3 corrections. And I'm like, the toothpaste has come out of everywhere. But that's unusual, right? Normally it's just like 1 or 2 things that you notice. They're like, okay, this dog doesn't want to do it anymore. Now I have the opportunity.
Right.
But if you've built in force fetch, if you've built in collar fetch, it's not that big of a deal.
Right. Everything you do from the very beginning is done with the intention to understand the next step. So if you've done it right, by the time you get to that point, they should have at least a base level of understanding to the point that once you start applying that pressure, it's at least after a little while understood.
Yep. And I think I'm just going to say it one more time, because this is something that I really had to learn, is that The basics training is about putting the tools on a tool belt so that when you need that tool, your dog knows what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's handling drills that you can do to develop different tools. I think that there's... anyway, we're getting off... we can go into like deep into this stuff. Yeah. And I'll back up for...
Here's how I look at it, the basics. If you have a crack in your foundation, eventually your floor is going to shift. When your floor shifts, your wall is going to move. When the wall moves, eventually your trusses are going to break. And then you spend all that money that you intended to put your fancy furniture in the house on your maintenance issues. And so going back to like my first 2 dogs, it's not that you can't troubleshoot those issues down the road in advanced training, but you spend more time troubleshooting problems with your dogs than you do working on the advanced level concepts.
Absolutely. And I think we could spend a second, because I'm sure that you've ran into problems with a dog that you felt like, hey, I've done a good job with the basics. And then there's something that's going to creep up, because that's what every dog is. I mean, if the dogs were robots, the most talented dog would win every single trial.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's not how it is. Like certain dogs that won last week didn't have a good day already.
Yeah.
That's just, they're going to be dogs. And so your dog training really is about, at least in this level that we're talking about, it's about, can you string enough good days that they outweigh the bad days?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which I don't think people really get until they start running things that are trials versus tests. Like that's a big difference. And I kind of lost my train of thought here for a second.
Well, we could talk about, since you just mentioned it, like the difference between hunt tests and field trials and, even the Super Retriever series, you're getting into very advanced level training and trialing. And I think you get to a certain point where a lot of your training, the emphasis...
I remember now, but finish your thought.
Well, what I was going to say is, at least this is where I'm at with Kate, is we've gone through the steps. For the most part, I've taught Kate everything that she's going to know. And we're at a point where the mental component, is she comfortable? Is she confident? Is far more important in my primary emphasis in training versus, did she pick this bird up the way that I wanted her to? It's not as much, did she pick it up perfectly? It's, how's her attitude? Is she confident getting out there?
And what was her decision making getting to that point?
Exactly. And that's something that I've come to realize with especially running all age trials. While don't get me wrong, marking is absolutely king. The dog that wins an open pins every mark. Most of the dogs that place pinned every mark. But what's equally as important to marking is a dog's ability to recover from a bad spot. And when your dog backsides a 350-yard retired bird, and it's going to happen no matter how talented they are, you want that dog to be able to recover. And they have to be comfortable and confident in themselves in order to do that. And so that's something I'm still learning how to do. But just kind of a shift in mindset from, a primary background in hunt tests where if you didn't run the setup perfectly, if you go to backside a gun, I'm going to stop, blow a whistle, and cast you. Yeah. Whereas field trial type training, you gotta think. Yeah. The dog has to think more, and you have to think more as a trainer.
And I think that what you're talking about is what I would say I started to discover last year. Was there's a fundamental. Okay, so I'm going to back up. When I first started training with field trialers and we were throwing singles, my dogs did way better than theirs did. Like, because I've taught my dogs very short marks where they pretty much, I made it so that most of the time they were pinning marks.
Sure.
Right? And I'm talking about a land setup here.
Yeah.
If I was talking about water, it'd probably be different. But
water's a tough one.
I was trying to I was just training with them. I was trying to learn. And I was like, why don't their dogs pin these marks? They're not, they're just farther.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that they spend so much more time teaching the dogs how to think and how to recover, because at the levels that they're doing, that is more important than the dog that just knows what blade of grass that bird is at. And I wanted to point that out. So that's something very recent that I'm really starting to understand. I'm starting to throw more contrary marks because I'm doing exactly what you're doing. I'm trying to make trying to make Winter more comfortable when things aren't black and white.
Right.
That is a whole level of talking about dog training that is not necessarily required to do well in Hunt Test game.
Totally agree.
And I notice a lot of the people who are communicating right now, whether that's on other podcasts or, whatever, other media channels that are out there, is there's a lot of people going through exactly what we're going through. Mm-hmm. All right. And that's a lot of the content that's being discussed is about the dog being comfortable. It's about the dog understanding how to work its way out of marks. And I think that's because all of the people who, to some degree have gotten to a level, that's what we're playing right now. That's what we're doing. So that's what we're thinking about. But I was talking to a friend, and he was trying to talk about how he's setting up these short Hunt Test distance marks like that. And I was like, dude, your dog is nowhere near needing nor ready for what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What the wave of communication in the Hunt Test field trial world is talking about. Because in my mind, I don't want people to take this the wrong way. The HRC program and even the master program, working with you, that is about understanding and being really good at the fundamentals. Mm-hmm.
So I totally agree.
And I almost think it's semi-dangerous for us to talk like we're talking right now, but not clarify that we're talking about old dogs who have been through an extremely good basics program, who understand all the black and white rules. Then we start to help them be comfortable in the unknowns or the things that don't make sense. And when I say that, I mean, most of the time, a standard cheating single, I'll just use that, which a cheating single is where you throw a bird down the shore to where the dog has to swim farther to get that bird. It would be easier for them to get out of the water earlier. So you teach them to swim directly to the bird, because if the farther the birds get, if the dog doesn't go directly to them, they're going to get lost. That's a fundamental. But when we say a contrary mark, we're saying you throw up the shore, or up the shore. You throw the bird closer, because a dog that hasn't been schooled in that is going to be like this doesn't compute with my brain. I've been taught to stay in the water. Now I have to get out, or a bridge bird, or a channel mark that's thrown over the channel and lands on the other side of the channel from where their gun is. That is to a dog that's like, I don't know what to do with that. That's what we're talking about really advanced work, because the judges have figured out that, well, not anybody, but the dogs at this level have been trained to stay in the water. So what happens when I tell them to get out of the water, not at the end? Well, that's hard. Now, what I want us to think about is that we have to have the foundations first before you ever can get to that level. And if your goal is to run HRC, even the Grand, the Grand and Master Hunter work, really what you need to be focusing on is those black and white concepts.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's kind of maybe it is kind of a cart before the horse type of situation.
Yeah.
But you're correct. In order to do those advanced level concepts, long distance marks, the fundamentals have to be there. And the expectation in hunt test training and hunt test setups should be that your dog's going to run them correctly.
Yeah, and we can get into a whole pile of can of worms about should a finished test have contrary marks or not.
Yeah, which we don't have to do.
No.
It's been a long time since I've run a finished test.
I really want to, but I'm trying not to ever get on a soapbox. But anyway, we can move on. One of the things so what I did want to talk about before was what you were talking about of how when you think a dog understands it, if you don't know when you should move on, stay there longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to reinforce that point. And I think that amateurs, like I talked to one yesterday that called me and said, "Hey, I've been listening to the podcast. I got a dog that, has passed 2 finish tests, and I'm having slow sits. Slow sits have started." And I said, "Well, what kind of handling drills do you do?" He's like, "Oh, I haven't done a handling drill in like a year or 2. And I was like, "Well, that's where you probably need." We talked about force to pile and some like really, some tricks that he can do to help the dog sit faster. Running against a fence because Loopy said, and we're not going to get into that because there's other people that can totally talk about that better than me. But I told him, I said, "Hey, when I have a dog that's in like running finish tests and they haven't like really advanced, I'm running a handling drill when they're in transition. I'm running one every single day." And when they're through transition and running like real cold blinds, I'm still doing one every other day. Mm-hmm. Like for probably until they're 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing that amateurs don't do.
I agree. And for whatever it's worth, I don't do drill work probably as much as I should, but not nearly as much as, first, second, early transition, late transition.
We're talking about different ages of dogs at this point.
Right. But even now, the beginning of the year, March, April, we're just getting into the water. You better believe I'm doing drill work. We're fine tuning on a smaller scale, some of the things as it gets warmer and we get bigger in our concepts, that the expectation is going to be it's ran properly. And that, I don't think that ever goes away. There might be some dogs out there that don't need to drill, but if you're an amateur, it kind of goes back to what you're saying. If you're an amateur and you've got the time with 1 or 2 dogs, why not do it?
Yeah. In the drills just change. That's what people don't realize is that, like, I try to still do at least once a week, I do a handling drill.
Yeah.
Because you'll see things that maybe aren't a problem, but you'll start to see dogs leaning towards one thing or the other. Right?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
You're not as watery as I think you. Like, you're doing it, but you're barely giving me what I want right now.
Yeah, I can see where your intention is.
I see what you're like. You're doing this like okay, we're gonna go work on this.
Yeah.
Because I believe that if you go to a test, you're gonna lose a certain amount of angle.
Sure.
Right? Like, if you're getting a good, nice 45 degree, I'm not saying 45 is what you want, but let's just use it for an example. If you're getting a nice 45 degrry cast in training, a little less. You're going to get like a 30 degree. So I
totally agree.
If you're talking about casting off a point and your dog like did it, like they cast it off of it, but they dug back pretty hard, you betcha that's what I'm going to go do. I'm going to go set up a drill to work on that. And the drills change, right? In transition, I'm doing either a 4-pole drill. It really, the distance and the complexity is what's changing. And I guess like I'd define drill work as anything that I'm repeating with very obvious destinations.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to run, like if I'm going to do a pattern blind, I'm going to run that, maybe 10 to 20 legs of it, depending on the distance, the heat and all that. And what I need. Sometimes like you're just doing a drill just to remind them you don't need to do any more than 10 legs. And you get one correction and get out of there, move on.
Right.
But, you start, with the T, then you move to some sort of mod T, double T. There's a couple different formations that you can do. Then you move to pattern blinds. And then eventually I think you move to tune-up drills. Like that's at least my progression. And I just don't think enough people do like real tune-up drills.
Yeah.
And amateurs have a huge advantage of that because a tune-up drill, to do it right, the way like Lardy describes it, can take like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
What pro's going to want to stand out there and do 7
you're right.
blinds for 7 days in a row?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what other things as an amateur that you felt like you wish you would have known?
Gosh, you're going to make me think now, and I'm not going to be able to come up with something. But after the podcast, I'll be like, we should have talked about that.
You'll be texting me on the way home.
That was just such a big one for me. But I do think in not doing some of the things correctly, having to having to go back and reteach more advanced level concepts through drill work did give me a little bit of perspective when training Kate to emphasize teaching a little bit more. So you mentioned like an angle back off of a point. I mean, that's something for maybe a week straight. I spent just teaching, and that's with a white stake. It's with visible bumpers. And that's something that I'll go back to even this day with her, that it's not something in hindsight I wish I would have done differently, but something I discovered was important to me as a trainer through just troubleshooting various issues with my first two dogs. So, I mean, it's just piggybacking off what we've been talking about, that the drill work is very important. Yeah, and no matter how advanced your dog is, it doesn't go away.
No, it doesn't go away. Like, yeah, 100%. And I like what you said about you go back to something.
Sure.
If you ever have a problem and you don't know what it is, you don't know what the dog is thinking, a lot of times I find that if I go back to whatever the fundamental start of, like, so if you taught your dog to run a blind, like you did force to pile, you did the T, and you did some other form of it, and you worked your way. What I like to do is just go back to the very beginning, depending on the issue. If the issue is a casting thing, I don't go to force to pile. I'd go to, like a double T or something, and see, like, am I getting the same response here?
Yeah.
Is this happening? And what I think a lot of times happens is we teach our dog in the drill field, and they know the drill field, and then we go try to run cold blinds. Well, I promise you, the dog knows the difference between a bunch of piles of bumpers against white poles and going to an organic setup where there's no identification.
Right.
And what I think a big thing that I wish somebody would have told me is that before you ever start running organic blinds, just take the drill that you're doing in a mowed field and take it to an actual setup. Like, literally ask, you can go to a Hunt Test training day and be like, hey, I'm going to set up a double T right in the middle of this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to run it, because you can eliminate, or it gives you the opportunity to see how your dog is going to respond in the environment that is a Hunt Test. And you can add more discipline to the blind part, the control part of the test.
Right. And I think that all kind of goes back to just thoroughness in your basics training and in your transition training, and not rushing through it too fast. One thing that I did differently with Kate that I thought was really helpful during her early transition work, this is probably something that pros do all the time and I just don't know it, but as we were progressing through pattern blinds and marking concepts through pattern blinds, I feel like I spent a lot of time doing the same thing, which was I would run 3 legs of a pattern blind, and wherever I was running my marks that day, I would run 3 blinds first. I would throw marks in relation to that blind, and then I would go back and run the blind again. And the second time you're running it through
the old fall.
So you're teaching the marking concept. You're also giving the dog the advantage in running the blind first and then running it again afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's something that at the end of the day, it took me more time to progress through the transition training because I spent time doing that. But I felt like it was, in the long run, very beneficial for her.
I started training with Clark maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, somewhere like that. And he always would talk about pattern blinds. Like I called him the pattern blind Nazi. And it was fortunate because I had Rex coming up. He was in the T work when I started seeing what Clark did, and I was like, I saw him do it a few times. He did it with Stroker, and he did it the week before he went to the Crown.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, if he's doing it the week before the Crown,
it's important.
It's probably pretty important.
Yeah.
And I don't think that what Dan taught me how to do a 4-pole drill, and I don't think it's really any different. Like you're still teaching all the same, like any sort of blind configure or any sort of drill configuration.
There may be nuances, but it's more or less the same.
Well, what it is different configurations give you different things to work on.
Sure.
And I've learned, I have 3 kind of pole configurations that I have based on what I'm trying to get. If I'm trying to get more angle, I set up what's called a mod tee, which is similar to a double tee because I'm actually giving overs and asking them to give me an over. But if that's not my problem and they're scalloping, well, I want more opportunities to work on the scallop. So then I put all 4 poles in a line.
Right.
Because I'm getting more opportunities to work on the scallop. And then if I'm working off casting out of suction, then I do this the way that Clark does it, where he has 1 pole and then I think he has, you can do it different ways, but 1 or 2 poles deep of that on either side. So now you can send them towards that short one, stop them in front of it, and work on getting the cast past the bumper or past that pile that's right in the middle. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I see what he's working on there. But what he did that was different that I hadn't seen anybody else do is he really started to do key relationship drills with it.
Yeah.
Where he was introducing every single part of it. And I was like, wow, that's something that I haven't had in my program. I was doing that all individually.
Yeah.
With different things.
Not lumping it all together.
And I added that to my transition. That was the end. That was like the graduation of transition to me was setting up pattern blinds, going through decoys, doing all those things that I knew. Because you can do anything that you can dream up through that. Right. And I was like, wow, that was a very good thing that I did with Rex. Yeah. And Clark has, here's the plug for the Hunt Test guy. Clark has a course on pattern blinds, and they're releasing a couple more courses. Either probably will be released by the time this podcast comes out. But building on top of that with some of the things Lyle's doing with forfaits and anyway, so if you guys are wanting to see this rather than just hear us talking about it, check out the Hunt Test guide and the courses, and you can see how Clark walks you through step by step how to do a pattern blind and do it the right way. And I'm sure that there's going to be tons of little things. That's the thing that we were talking about this earlier. We were talking about how important content is to listen to as an amateur. Sure. Like we listen to every podcast. We listen to, anytime somebody does something on YouTube, we're watching it. And you might sit there for the entire podcast. And you why don't you say it? You say.
Well, what we were talking about earlier and what I've found to be most beneficial about podcasts is, there may be a 5-second segment of a podcast that resonates with me, and that can completely change the trajectory of your training method for, potentially forever. I think back to like when I first started, I may not have understood everything that was being discussed in a podcast. So it might be a little bit different perspective there, but that's what I appreciate about it now is you might hear something from a pro that's, like a field trial pro that's been doing it forever. And he may just casually mention something. I'm like, wait a minute. I'd never thought about that before. Yeah. That's something I'd like to start integrating into my training program.
I want to see how that would work. Because you understood the why. You just didn't hear him say something. You're like, it clicked on something about like, oh, this is how I could have solved that problem I had a long time ago. And you stored that in your little bank. Right. I think the same thing is for these online courses that the Hunt Test guy is doing is that, I had seen Clark do these pattern blinds in live action, right? Yeah. And he was talking me through it. He was showing me why he was doing it with the remote send. They were getting ready for the crown, so they're doing a lot of remote sends, and he was using that as just, this is my foundation. This is how I remind them of all those things. But when I watched it, I was like, oh, I didn't get that part by watching him live. Oh, I didn't. Right. I missed that part. It wasn't like I was like, wow, I never had heard of a pattern blind before. Yeah. But it was all those little things, and I was like, that stuff's priceless to me. Yeah. Like that information is like, could save a situation that I have with a dog. Yeah, and it's one thing to see something be done and understand that in doing that thing in training, it leads to success, but it's a deeper level of understanding once you understand why. Yeah. Because you then understand how a dog perceives it. And it means more later on. Yeah, 100%. Well, I wanted to end this, this conversation with. I wanted to kind of know, like, where are you going? What's your goal? Gosh, in all honesty, I don't know that I really have a plan moving forward other than just continue running.
I enjoy the challenge of what's unattainable. So as long as Kate is interested and demonstrates she's capable of running all age trials, we're going to continue running all age trials. I love running the Grand, so we're going to keep running the Grand for as long as she's able. I love running the Super Retriever Series. So I don't know that it's anything different that we're planning on doing. But yeah, it's the last 4 years, it's been working towards something. And then you get to this point where I think for me, I'm starting to just appreciate the training more than anything.
Yeah.
So I don't need to have a direction, any specific venue. I like to train. And so we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah. I'm totally getting to that same point. Like, we didn't have a great week of training.
Yeah.
And I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
Like before, I would have been like, should I run her? Should I not do this? Should I do that? And I think if she was a younger dog, there might be some merit to like, okay, is this going to become a bad habit? But I was just like, she just missed a bunch of marks I thought she was going to get.
Yeah.
Whatever. And now I'm just like, I'm just going to hang out with my friends. I'm going to see what happens.
Right.
And because to me, like I said this in another podcast, like I have to drive because I love grounds. Like there's another level of like, when you have hoboed around like I have, at every retention pond in
my gosh,
20-mile radius.
Well, if you're like me, you come to a place like this. We're running at Abby's farm.
Yeah.
I'll look up Zillow and be like, what houses are for sale around this place? Just for like 15 minutes, just escape, and it's never going to happen. But yeah, I'm the exact same way. You appreciate retention ponds, like you'll see a pond with a little point on it. You're like, ooh, that would be nice.
I can work that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, you can do it. Like, I don't think when Winter got her first Grand Pass, I think we maybe had spent like 3 days on like tech water.
Yeah.
And everything I did was on like retention ponds, and you just find that one thing that you needed to work on. And that was what your day was going to be about.
Right.
It wasn't about everything else. You weren't trying to combine a bunch of stuff. And now that I'm super spoiled because I have some amazing training grounds that I have the opportunity to train at now. And it's I just love it. I get up at 4:20. I do my routine, and I drive an hour to the grounds I train at, and I train for an hour and a half, and I go home.
Yeah.
And then I go to work. And it's just so much fun.
Yeah.
All my friends that are training with me, they're all running master tests and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm content just training.
Yeah, you just like to train. And I think you get to that point once you get your Master Hunter title, you get the Grand title, you get to the point where you enjoy the challenge of trying to figure out, trying to troubleshoot. You notice that your dog is struggling with something. All right, let's get into this dog's head. What's going on here?
What are they thinking?
And that's where I'm at too, that's the reward to me, is figuring out, observing an undesirable behavior and figuring out that issue. And it's an ongoing thing.
And I'm going, I've trained a decent amount of basics dogs and transition dogs. It's a completely different thing when the dog is turning 4, when they're 4, turning 5, turning 6. Like you see problems that you never would have dreamed of having.
Yeah.
And it's just because, I think it's because they get bored.
Well, they probably do.
They get bored on some things that you're trying to, maybe this is wrong. This could totally be wrong. But I'm noticing that if I throw stuff that's too easy, I think she gets bored and she doesn't give me as much effort as she would.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, if I throw things that are too hard for too long of time, and I'm talking like a week or two of all open stuff,
yeah.
then she's doesn't want to do that. And then so you're constantly just managing. And that's a balance. And that's where I'm because it's a different type of balance. It's not just momentum and no momentum.
Right.
It's super subtle.
A lot of nuances. Yeah. And you're exactly right. And I actually just, I've been kind of going through the same thing with Kate. We were at a place last fall where it was like she couldn't miss a mark. Mm-hmm. And then going into this spring, like I said, we came off of those all age finishes. I'm thinking, all right, this is something that we can be competitive in. So this winter, next spring,
that's what
we're gonna challenge. We're gonna get better. And in doing that, I felt like it wasn't so much her marking, but her ability to recover from a bad spot. It was a subtle difference, but my observation was that she wasn't as good, at least during that time period, at recovering. It was like her confidence was going down. And so it was one of those moments where I really had to start giving thought to what we were training. Am I challenging too much? Do we need to simplify things? And so making those adjustments moving forward, I think we're getting there, but, you know, kind of just exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's agonizing to some degree.
It is. I mean, again, it's just a challenge. And
it's a different type of challenge.
Yeah. When you figure it out, it's very rewarding. But in the meantime, can be very frustrating.
Yep.
And I mean, for me, it's almost like going back to, like, you know, your first couple dogs, when you're going through basic training, you realize you make a mistake. It's like, oh, shoot, am I ever going to be able to fix this? And I don't have that problem in basic training anymore. I know how to fix those things. But you get into this advanced level work, and it's like, oh, shoot, are we doing something that we shouldn't have? And is the fix I'm thinking of going to be the solution or not? And so to me, that's a little bit stressful too.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to what you said about, you know, you've got that talented 2 or 3 year old dog. Now they're 4 or 5 and you're starting to notice mistakes. Sometimes I almost wonder if it's now they're old enough to know better.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Oh, totally. 100%.
And, yeah. So that dog that didn't know any better than to stay in the water on the cheating single, now they realize it's quicker to get around the pond.
It's like if you don't let them ever cheat, they don't realize that it's faster. And then you
Right.
get into these gray marks and you're letting them kind of get away with stuff because that is the hardest part. And I think that's a major difference in field trial training versus hunt test training, is that hunt test, the distance is so short. I think the dogs understand quicker if they did something right or wrong. I think it's a lot harder when you get to the field trial game because there's so much distance between those marks. And I'll just use water as an example. Like you could be, to you from the line, they can be significantly off. Mm-hmm. But when they're younger and they don't really understand that, they don't realize they are.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like that's why a crosswind water blind is one of the hardest things to teach a dog.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at that point. They don't realize that they're moving.
Right.
Anyway, we definitely don't need to go down to that road.
We can do that in another podcast.
Because I still don't know how to do it right.
Yeah. Maybe once we figure that out, we can talk about it. Yeah.
We need to bring a pro on that actually has had a lot of success.
That's probably a better idea.
Yeah. That's very good. Well, John, I appreciate you being on this, and good luck today. I hope you do slightly worse than me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Spoken Super Retriever series.
No, it's good, man. This is what I'll end with. We were talking about this briefly before. I was like the competition level at these things compared to 2 years ago in the amateur is like
it's
night and day.
It's a big difference, and like you said, we were talking about it. I think what happens is the amateurs that are running, you know, they're better than they were 2 or 3 years ago.
There's
the
more
same
of them.
dog. There's more of them, and the dogs are better.
Yeah.
That 2 or 3 year old dog is now 5, 6, 7, and
it's almost like it's just like the Open and the all age stakes now in field trials. There's probably 10 dogs that can win the amateur here. Probably more.
Oh, yeah.
Probably 15 of the 25 can win.
I would say on any given weekend, the majority of the dogs running in the amateur, probably the Open too. I'm not paying as much attention to the Open dogs as the amateur, but if you look at the lineup, every dog that's running, or most of them, have won an event at some point in time.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's challenging.
It's getting crazy. And so all those people that just sit there and look at the internet and look at scores, you got no idea what's actually happening. I'll just say that.
That's right.
But keep doing it, because one day you can keep working hard. You'll be here too, and then you'll be kicking our butts.
That's right.
So, well, John, once again, thanks, man.
Absolutely.
It was good. I hope you had a good time.
Thanks for having me. I hope we helped somebody. I'm not sure if we did or not, but
I'm sure there's one thing in there that if they listen to.
Yeah, maybe there was that 5-second segment that I was talking about.
Yeah, good. Thanks, man.
Yeah.